I wanted to talk to you about sort of what I coined the everything crisis, in the sense that we're living through such turbulent times, which is a bit of a cliche because people always say it. But then again, if I look back sort of as an economist, we had this massive pandemic. Now we have inflation that we hadn't seen before, geopolitical turmoil that we haven't seen perhaps since the end of the Cold War, especially not when it comes to sort of the size of sanctions and what it's doing to gas prices. Then also one of your favorite industries, crypto, is collapsing. So what's your take on all of this? Because typically you report, but I would also, want to know sort of your own opinion on this kind of stuff. Are you scared?
Well, it's kind of an interesting thing. Like it's funny because I think there's always, as you mentioned, sort of always crises in markets. Like I sort of started in finance in the late 90s, and there was the bubble and boom of the dot-com stocks. And then we had September 11th, and then we had the build up to the credit crunch and that collapse. And so, there's always drama in the world. I guess that's just the way the way humanity is. But I do agree with you. There seem to be a lot of things coming together right now. To a certain extent, I wonder if it's just that markets and everything have become more globalized, and so you just see higher correlation between markets. Because we'll say historically, individual countries might have economies that were much more distant from each other, while right now even you see, as the United States starts hiking interest rates, you see impacts in emerging markets and so on. And I think the world is maybe just more interconnected. So there's maybe fewer places to hide than there were in the past. Like maybe, 20 years ago, if one market was struggling, you could go to another. And to a certain extent, the crypto people were making the argument that Bitcoin or, various crypto coins were an entirely separate ecosystem in which, we'll say, for example, like the Bitcoiners for a while talked about it as a hedge for inflation because they felt inflation related to money printing. Mm-hmm. And, then the inflation kicks in and crypto gets destroyed. I think we're just really seeing that maybe markets are becoming more risk on, risk off, and just a much higher correlation to each other. And that also means that investors struggle to get the same benefit from diversification that they used to in the past.
Yeah, and do you also see this across markets? So I definitely agree that I see it across countries. We economists even have like an official term for this, which is the global financial cycle, meaning that sort of countries are much more correlated and also react much more strongly to monetary policy decisions, so hiking or lowering interest rates in the United States. But do you also see it across markets? So was this different in the dot-com? I think at that time, the housing market didn't seem to be that much affected by the stock market, for example.
Well, it's interesting. I'm slightly fascinated by the overlaps between the dot-com bubble and the recent market conditions, because for a long time I argued that things weren't as bubbly a year or two ago as they were in the late 90s, because there's almost, when you look at the valuation some companies had in 1999, like it was absolutely insane. And markets were very different back then in that companies used to IPO in order to raise capital. Now they raise capital in private markets and they IPO at multi-billion-dollar valuations, while in 1999, you would see these dot-com startups that were sort of three guys in a rented office 2 months later IPOing on the NASDAQ for a significant chunk of change. The stock market didn't get as overdone this time around, but it would appear to me that maybe that was because things like crypto took in so much of the froth, and mm-hmm. A lot of the arguments that I hear from young people who invest in crypto are the exact same arguments that young people were making in the late 1990s about the dot-com startups. So I slightly wonder if the reason things are a little bit less frothy in the stock market 6 months ago simply because the place where the kind of crazy money was going was crypto rather than the stock market. There were just different places for people to go with their money. So